So thank you everybody that's come for July's Didactics series. We appreciate you, Dr. Alvord and Dr. Ferguson, for being here to talk to us a little bit about cultural medicine and primary care. So I'm gonna hand it off to you guys for a little bit more of an introduction, and then we'll just jump right in.
Wait, Dr. Alvord, you can go first.
Okay, sure. So good morning. My name is Lori Arviso Alvord. Lori Arviso Alvord Yenishe Senajeni do Ashihidene Bashishchin Tis Uzin Nasha Prosser Washington Nasha. So basically I'm giving my clans, which we do with a Navajo introduction. I am a general surgeon and author and practice currently in Toppenish, Washington, serving the Yakima tribe and the Yakima Valley farm workers. And I'm author of a book known as The Scalpel and the Silver Bear, which integrates Navajo healing practices and traditions with Western medicine.
Mekamna or Kamagla in New Mexico. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Gary Ferguson. I serve as the Director of Outreach and Engagement at iReach, which is the Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health. We're located in the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine, where we focus on health equity research. And I also serve in an advisory capacity over the Center for Native American Health Sciences, along with Dr. Alvord, and a variety of amazing rock stars who are helping to integrate the first indigenous clinical sim space, which we'll be talking about. And Dr. Alvord and I'll just give some brief overviews of our work, and then we'll be also talking about the sim space and just the exciting rollout of incorporating indigenous ways of knowing and healing into our clinical settings and helping us serve our Indian, Alaska Native Hawaiian, indigenous peoples across America in a more culturally humble way. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slide set. So just a little bit more about myself. I am a naturopathic physician by training, and I've been in public and population health over the last 20 years, primarily in the Alaska tribal health system. I'm an enrolled member of the Kagan-Taigungan tribe. We're Nunga from Southwest Alaska, the Aleutian region, and I've worked in a variety of capacities across the tribal health system, from a provider and also in executive leadership at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, where we serve all of our Alaska Native people, 170,000 of us at the hospital system there. So I've been honored to work and serve our people and continue to do so in my new capacity here at Washington State University. So just confirming you see the presentation mode. Yes, good.
Yes.
So again, we're affiliated with Washington State University, Center for Native American Health Sciences, and the School of Medicine, College of Medicine. And, looking at the work that we're doing, it's deep work as we decolonize approaches within the sacred space of healing. And there is a national shift towards health equity, incorporating culturally humble ways, and really making sure that we're serving our indigenous patients in a way that meets them culturally, and really recognizes also the deep traditions of healing that have existed for thousands of years in our indigenous populations. Rather than coming in with guns blazing and we're going to fix you, it's about a collaborative exercise of bringing in the best of Western medicine and also indigenous ways of knowing and healing. And a little bit about my background. I worked for many years in my own home community, the Onunga. We were some of the first to be colonized in Alaska in the 1700s. And so due to colonization and historical trauma, many of us, in fact, for almost 200 years, we didn't have our dance. And due to a collaboration with some of our Russian relatives that didn't have as deep of an impact of colonization, we were able to relearn some of our songs and dances and reintegrate regalia. And now we have a cultural revival going on in our region, which to me is indicative of also what's going across Indian country as people reclaim their heritage, their connection. And there's a deep healing that comes from, as some of our Lummi and Coast Salish elders talk about, knowing who you are and where you come from, and the healing traditions of your ancestors, that truly is deep healing. And we know that there have been generations impacted due to colonization and historical trauma. And so with this backdrop, many of us are working in healthcare settings of folks who've had boarding school experiences. My grandmother was one of them. And so our family suffered because she didn't and wasn't able to share her culture and her language in a way that was cogent with, how she was raised. She had culture beat out of her, kill the Indian, save the man type approaches from the federal government. And so when we look at our healthcare settings, many of our elders, and it wasn't that long ago that this sign was outside the Baranoff Hotel in our state's capital in Juneau, and it persisted into the 60s, where racism was alive and well, and it continues to be an issue in a backdrop. So as we look at serving people, we need to understand the history. We need to understand what our elders have gone through, and then the intergenerational effects of that in our communities. And also the healing traditions as we look at, so this is Ayuk, or Hudson Bay tea. There's a dance associated with this for healing. It's used for ceremony and cleansing. It's also great tea for colds and flu, and is primarily used in the fall when it's cold and flu season. So it's an amazing ceremonial and cultural and also medicinal plant. And like many of our healing traditions, we have stories, we have dances, we have a spiritual connection to these traditions. And so it's holistic. It's not just a biochemical property that exists in a plant, but those also are part of it. So, again, our sciences are aligned. Traditional ecological knowledge, our indigenous ways of healing and knowing, as well as Western medicine, they're all aligned, but we need to make sure as we work in healthcare settings to be cognizant of the thousands of years of healing traditions that existed in many of our indigenous communities, that many of whom are reclaiming and want to reclaim. And so how can we get in the know as we serve the people that we're going to be working with? My role as I travel, I'm newer to the Pacific Northwest just the last couple of years, and have worked in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm still a visitor, and I'm a tribal member, but I'm a visitor here. And so I work with tribal nations, and I always start with asking questions and inquiry and curiosity as we look at how can we develop intelligent cultural approaches and honor the healing traditions of the Pacific Northwest tribes. And that starts by listening and asking questions and involving elders and doing your groundwork before you step into a clinical setting. And that's really the heartbeat of a lot of the work that we're trying to do at the Center for Native American Health Sciences at Washington State University, is how do we incorporate that within our training for our future physicians, our future pharmacists, our future nurses, and allied healthcare professionals, so that in the end, we set them up for success in working in our indigenous communities. And it's a journey, and it's a journey of exploration for all of us as we learn about each other's cultures and ways of knowing and healing. And so I am going to press pause, and I'm going to let Dr. Alvord share a few words, and then we're going to jump back into talking about our clinical sim space. Dr. Alvord.
Thanks so much. And okay, yeah, that works. Thank you so much, Gary. Some of your
good looks good. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me? Did I mute? No, I'm not muted. Okay. Sorry, I'm usually better technically than this, but this is my first time sharing slides on a Zoom. So just a few more words. So I gave my introduction in Navajo, but I'm actually raised in Crown Point, New Mexico, which is the Eastern Navajo Agency. And it is located a little bit northwest of Gallup, New Mexico, and very remote. an hour's drive from even real groceries, and about 200 to 2,500 people living there, but many more people living out further in their camps and their homes. So I was raised there, attended Dartmouth College as an undergrad, and then Stanford for medical school and residency, and then came back and spent my first 6 years of training in surgery at Gallup Indian Medical Center. So when I'm speaking to you, I have been one of you. I have lived you lived your life. You might even be where I've been. I spent many years at Acoma Canyon Cita Laguna Hospital training with Dr. Ron Lujan on weekends, holidays, summers, and whenever I could, because he was a native surgeon that brought me into surgery. Having said that, my focus of a lot of my career, I've done my academic medicine and been a dean of students at Dartmouth, University of Arizona, Tucson, as well as Central Michigan. But my other life has been about developing understandings of ceremonies. And so how does this fit in? I think some of the ceremony elements can actually bring real healing. People used to never believe that we're non-native. They used to think that none of this was important or necessary, and they tried to eliminate our ceremonies because it was in competition with other religions, particularly Christianity. But in the ceremonies, there is quite a lot of healing. And so this is actually usually an hour to 90-minute talk, and I'm going to go fast forward for you. And the importance of this is to gain respect for Native peoples and how they do what they do, and understand why ceremonies can be important. When I was in Gallup, we spent a lot of time trying to develop a very culturally friendly environment, to where we tried to bring art into the hospitals. We tried to respect communication styles. We even allowed sacred objects into the operating room, such as eagle feathers and corn pollen bags, in plastic for OSHA, but in a plastic bag. But still, people could bring their things that were important to them, and we did have healers come and say prayers and chants for our patients, and we integrated our work with medicine men so that they could have ceremonies either before or after their procedures. So I wrote a book about this called The Scalpel and the Silver Bear, and it's used in many curriculums now, and goes places I never get to go. But it's not only helped educate the world, but it's also inspired many young people to follow, meaning Native people, to go into healthcare, medicine, and higher education. So with that, hang on a sec. I didn't set my timer because I don't usually use timers, but since I have to share, hopefully that works. I'm going to take about 3 or 4 minutes off of my thing. So now, advancing my slides, I typically, oh, there it is. Okay, maybe that. Okay, good. I usually do it on the arrow screens on my computer, but at the moment, we're doing it this way. So in our medicine, the Native people were said to be created by a holy person named Changing Woman, Asan al-Yehe, and with her work came a number of ceremonies, including one called the night chant. And the night chant was born in a place called Canyon de Chelly, which is in northeastern Arizona on the reservation. It is said to be the home of the night chant. And many of the principles discussed are directly drawn from the night chant, also known as the Yebache. Some of you might know that name for this ceremony. Those arrows go away if you don't. Our ceremonies are done often with sand paintings that medicine men do very painstakingly, and they are actually destroyed right after the ceremony. Even though they're that elaborate, they're a lot like Tibetan mandalas. Much energy and time and precision is put into them. There's no template underneath them, but the medicine man puts the sand in his hand and then makes the painting. We have in the ceremonies dancing, And these are some of the Yebache dancers. They're also much like the Kachinas. And I'll be referring to one of them a little bit later, who is called Yaskiri. He's a blue ram and carries part of the medicine for this talk. In our world, we think of healing and illness as being an imbalance in any part of our lives. It can be an imbalance in the mind, the body, or the spirit. Whole communities can be out of balance, or our relationships with animals and the environment can also be out of balance. We refer to our way of being in balance as Hojo, which is a combination of the ideas of balance, harmony, beauty, and peace. It is a way of right living with others, and it includes everything around us, not just people, but our environment, our animal world, everything is, we strive to live in balance and peace with all parts of our world. We also believe that we're very interconnected with everything in our world, which I'll talk in a moment about. This is a example, a beautiful picture of Changing Woman creating our clans. Many of you know that Navajos have clans, and so the clans each come with their own either reference to a particular place in the Navajo world or animals. So I have Ashihidene, which is the salt people, is one of my clans, and then Sinajeni is the other, which is actually literally translated as black streaked wood or ponderosa pine. We're affiliated with Sisnajin, the Eastern Sacred Mountain, which is Blanca Peak in southern Colorado, and we are considered one of the 4 bear clans. What does all this matter? It gives people a sense of place and identity and a feeling of connectedness to their surroundings, and that's very important for mental health. So part of Hojo also involves the concept of living in balance and harmony with all things, but it's also the name of our creator. So our belief is that our creator created all things and is inside of all things, and because of all that, we are all interconnected with our creator. So the name of that creator is Sa'anagai B'K'e Hojo. Sorry, I haven't said it in a while. And interestingly, Sa'anagai is male, B'K'e Hojo is female. Sa'anagai is Father Sky, B'K'e Hojo is Mother Earth. And this is very much like yin and yang. Each side has its own powers and respect and place. But our belief is that that we intensify our relationships with our creator and each other through ceremony, and also that Sa'anagai B'K'e Hojo, the name of our creator, has a consciousness, and that we are part of that consciousness. And some of the medicine men also refer to it as universal mind, which is to say that the universe has a consciousness that we are part of. So it's kind of a big idea, but it means that every part of everything is important and needs to be healthy. I'll pass through this. We always focus on good outcomes for the future and think in a good way because of these same concepts. Our medicine men say that the key to restoring someone to health is to purify their thoughts, that our thoughts have the foremost energy that we have as people. Ceremonies are done to beautify our thoughts, and then the body will get well. Hojo is the embodiment of this idea. But if you think about it, it is also a way of releasing and relieving stress, because when you rebalance your mind and you think, focus on good things and good relationships with everyone, that reduces your stress. And there are many, many elements to this way of achieving harmony. So harmony is kind of the opposite of stress, opposite of distress and depression. And this is a study of what's called mind-body medicine or psychoneural immunology, where they found that psychological stress was associated with impairment of the immune system, along with interference with, or actually distress and depression were associated with carcinogenesis. So all of these things mean that the mind's influence on the body is very important and very, very necessary. And so when the medicine men say that the mind is the foremost energy, they really mean it, that you need to balance your mind to be healthy. But there are other things where the mind affects the body that we are aware of, such as the fact that stress during pregnancy can cause premature delivery, that increased stress can cause migraines or ulcers or many other medical problems, and makes almost every illness you have worse. So interestingly, interventions that help when they studied this were relaxation training, stress management, and support groups. And I focus on support groups because what is a ceremony but a great big group of people supporting each other and going through it together and focusing on their own harmonious relationships. This is a young woman having a kinelta, which is the girls' puberty ceremony, and it reinforces many other concepts in that I kind of have to go through quickly, but she's making a huge corn cake with cornmeal that's baked in the ground, given to all members of the community with a blessing. And for a brief period of time, she actually becomes changing woman. And with that power of being changing woman, she touches everyone at the ceremony and is able to impart the energy of the holy people into that person to give them better health. So she not only does this help our community feel that they're connected and with each other and supporting each other, but it also gives her a very high level of self-esteem. And the Navajo community and tribe is matriarchal, and women are very, very strong and have a very strong sense of being. Here are other elements in the ceremony that are used, other senses for which you can impart this sense of well-being and happiness to the body and the mind. And I'll just let you look at those. But to focus for a moment on meditation, just because there has been some research done by Dr. Davidson at University of Wisconsin, as well as Sarah Lazar at the UMass hospitals. They studied brain states in meditators that's meditated for a long time, and they found some interesting changes in the brain on functional MRI. And Native American practices have very strong similarities to meditation and mindfulness, particularly the use of chant, where many of our chants are very repetitive, and the meditations are also very, very repetitive. We say the same things in chant many, many times over and over again to still the mind. And so the other thing is that the drums that we use in our ceremonies hold the mind focused on one sound. We have many of our chants involve guided visualizations, which, well, let's see how much time I'm doing. I'll give you, so like one of our guided meditations is Housemaid of Dawn, which is part of the Beauty Way ceremony. And it is, try to do a short segment. Housemaid of Dawn, Housemaid of Evening Light, Housemaid of dark cloud is up at the house's door. The trail out of it is dark cloud. The jagged lightning stands high upon it. Happily may I walk, happily with abundant flowers and plants may I walk, happily with prayer may I walk, happily on the trail of pollen may I walk. May it be beautiful, Hojo, before me, may it be beautiful behind me, may it be beautiful above me, may it be beautiful below me, may it be beautiful all around me. In beauty it is finished. Hojona Hasli, Hojona Hasli, Hojona Hasli, Hojona Hasli. So you can see that that's a guided visualization that takes the mind to a place of great beauty and stillness. And dark cloud, by the way, is a cloud pregnant with rain. And rain is very precious in the Southwest, as we all know, for healing. There's also an energy medicine component to much of our ceremonies. There is quite a lot of vibration. And if you studied acupuncture, you know that chi has a vibrational component. So although this has not been formally studied, it is my belief, and I do have formal training in acupuncture, that the vibrations coming in from the ceremonies may also be positively impacting the body. So I did talk about functional MRIs. What's happening in people with meditation show that the left prefrontal lobe has increased focus and attention. Feelings of happiness, calm, and well-being are noted as well. And they also found an increased immune response to influenza antibodies. And there's a picture of the changes on functional MRI in the prefrontal lobe. And I did not say, and should have mentioned, that cortexes were also found to be thicker in meditators. So it's really interesting that people that are using meditation practices actually have been found to have true physical changes in the brain. And I don't think anyone would have predicted or thought that before. So going to the body now, we talked about the mind. In traditional lifestyles and ways we lived before Westernization, they involved using the body. The body was meant to be used. The body was developed to be used, and if you don't use the body, it doesn't stay well. It gets sick. Our lifestyles require hauling water, chopping wood. Physical wellness is very important and highly valued. In the Kennel Da that I mentioned, every morning that we run to meet the dawn, the young woman leads the way, and no one can catch her. Additionally, traditional diets are healthier. They involve more vegetables and less meat. Meat was really precious. It was not there every meal, and sometimes had to last all winter because it was hunted to achieve. And there are even spiritual and nutritional connections to some of our healthy food. Corn and corn pollen are very central to our ceremonies. This is one of our sand paintings that's also been woven into a rug with Mother Earth and Father Sky side by side. Father Sky has the sun and the moon and the stars and some constellations. Mother Earth has corn, squash, beans, and tobacco clockwise. As I gave this talk some time ago, a nutritionist came up to me and said, do you know that if a person only ate corn, squash, and beans, that it would supply 97% of their nutritional requirements that their body needs? And I said, no, I did not know that. And I think that was really impressive to note that many other tribes also use the three sisters, corn, squash, and beans. Tobacco is also included, but it is not tobacco like a Marlboro. It's mountain tobacco that doesn't have a lot of the same components. But also tobacco is not used like you smoke 3 packs a day. It's used to be used in ceremony with prayer. And my own belief is that it was encoded into sacredness to protect people from overuse of it, but I do not know that for sure. It's just a thought. Traditional diets have vegetables. In many tribes, they have fish. Navajos don't typically eat fish, but of course in the Northwest, salmon reigns supreme meat, and they're far higher in fat and protein. Berries and nuts used in many tribes are very high in antioxidants. Just by returning to what we used to eat in the past, that we may be able to reduce our healthcare disparities by reducing the harmful effects of obesity, which, as you know, is linked with many other illnesses and actually is a risk factor for cancer and heart disease. Here is another beautiful, I just can't get over some of the beautiful art. This is a sand painting too of Mother Earth and Father Sky. And so I just needed to share it, I guess. Anyway, I'm in such awe of the art of our people. Then let's talk for a moment about spirit. So I said mind, body, spirit. So in our teachings, we are considered spiritual beings. As I mentioned before, we are part of the rest of the universe. There are sacred winds that are thought to travel through the universe. They are called nifchi. Sorry, I don't have the /L there. And our breath is part of this wind, and health is the well-being of all elements of the universe. And with our belief that everything is interconnected, we are very, very invested in everything being healthy. The air, the water, the earth need to be clean and healthy, because if they are not, then we are not clean and healthy. And it's so interesting that if you study environmentalism and you study ecosystems, you learn that, yes, we need all of these things to be very, very healthy for us, for everything to function well. We need air to breathe. We need water to drink. We need clean soil for our food, and to support the animal world and the plant worlds. And so everything's interconnected. And even though that sounds like a mystical concept, it really isn't, because we're all sharing carbons. I'll eat an apple that's got carbon in it. I use it for my own energy, and I excrete it out, and the cycle keeps going. I breathe oxygen in, I expel CO2. The plants need the CO2 to be able to breathe. There are all these intricate interconnections of many of our elements in the elemental chart of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbons. All those things are deeply interconnected, and we don't respect those enough in Western society. Still pollution and greenhouse gases, because even though the Western people think they are smarter than Native people, and they act like that, somehow the planet is not benefiting from all of that superiority. So just for people to have, just to follow some of these very, very obvious, the importance of these obvious needs to tend to everything around us, we would be doing probably much better if we followed traditional ways of thinking than if we followed Western ways of thinking. In our ceremonies, the natural world is considered sacred, and it is at the top. In all of our ceremonies, it's always embedded. House made of dawn, house made of evening light. We're always referencing it. So we have taken the natural world and we have given it value assignments of sacred and spiritual and family. We refer to the earth as our mother, the sky as our father, the animals our brothers and sisters. When a culture does that, what happens with that is it lends a natural protective effect to whatever value assignment you give, whatever you give a value assignment of sacred or family to, because those are the things you protect and defend at all costs, right? The things you consider family and sacred. So when our culture does encode the natural world in that, that is how we were able to keep our environment clean and pure for many generations. This is an artist's rendition of this idea. Again, Harrison Begay, of living in harmony with all beings and the animal and the natural world. I'm going to finish up with a quick story in the night chant, The Dream of the Blue Ram. So this is another example of this idea of living in harmony with our sacred world. In the night chant, which was, as I said, comes from Canyon de Chelly, a boy had a dream, and in a dream, this is ages ago, rams with blue faces came to visit him. So if you look down in the right lower corner, you'll see the blue ram. That's Yaskiti, and he has the ram horns coming up, and he's one of our holy people. The rams came to the boy and they told him, "Your people are hunting more game than they need, and it is throwing the universe off balance. And if they continue, we will make the game scarce, and there will be a famine, and there will be starvation." And So the boy woke up from his dream and he went to the hunters of the tribe and he told them the dream and the prophecy. And they laughed at him and they said, go back to your dreaming and let us do the hunting. And sometimes I will say men here, because if he had gone to the women, they might have listened. But anyway, as it goes, they went to the hunters, who were men typically, although women hunt as well too, but I digress. The prophecy came true. The game became very scarce. There was a famine, and the people remembered the dream and the warning from the rams, and they resolved to never, ever overhunt game again. They resolved to only take what they need. And they resolved not only to do that, but to only take what they need of every resource, not just the game, but everything. And that's one of our core principles as our tribe and most tribes, many tribes, practice this principle of subsistence living, it's called. It's only taking what you need from the earth and not taking more. And that alone too, the overuse, the overfishing that we've seen happen in places, just the exploitation, the forests that get logged and run down, particularly in the past. There's certainly been more attention to it now so that they're more protected, but the old wood forests are prime examples of this idea, or the lack of this idea. So the blue ram is in sand paintings as well. He's in our world and will not be forgotten. And also in petroglyphs to show the blue ram's been with us a very long time in the Southwest. So with that, obviously these are values that demonstrate sound ecological principles for conservation of natural resources, that had they been in place hundreds of years ago, we might not be facing global warming, but we should certainly be using them as we look to the future. And so I'm going to end with Shiprock, which is one of our sacred geographies in the northwest corner of New Mexico, with dark cloud, which is rain. Thank you so much. Back to you, Gary.
Thank you, Dr. Alvord. And I'm always inspired by your words and the deep wisdom from our Navajo Nation. So powerful. Thank you, Kagasakuk. So as we look at the indigenizing of our clinical simulation space, we're going to talk now about some of the work that's being done that Dr. Alvord and I and an amazing team of tribal leaders, health experts that come from the indigenous world, that are helping advise and provide oversight to this amazing space. As we look at SIM, I finished my medical school training in 2001, and SIM has completely been amazing to see what's happened with SIM since, and also the last couple of years with the pandemic. It's blown up in some very good ways. So this new space is an initiative at Washington State University Center for Native American Health Sciences. We're all about honoring indigenous perspectives and health needs. And it's an amazing space. I hope some of you may get a chance to tour. And Dr. Alvord, feel free to share any words as I move through. So when we look at our space, how do we have culturally patient-centered care? What does our space look like? What can we do? Some of us don't have the luxury of modifying our space, but in this case, we've really added some touches to make it more friendly towards patients. The way we do lighting, we have art. Our goal is to balance Western medicine with indigenous teaching and practice, so that we can have a setting that's professional, but also as culturally friendly as possible. And behind this,
I don't see any art yet there, Gary.
Yeah, I know. I'd say this one, it doesn't show the art. So this is pre-art. So actually, there is some art since this photo was taken. And it's one where when we look at health disparities and outcomes, for many years, I would be traveling to some of our rural villages, and providers would be coming in who had very little to no training on the people they were serving. And unfortunately, cultural faux pas happened all the time. And then people felt like they weren't listened to. It really affected clinical care. So how do we address that? And how do we have our providers front loaded with information, clinical stimulation experience that is more real time what they'll be facing, especially if you work in Indigenous communities or in communities of color. So, how do we be responsive? How do we be respectful? And how do we have proficiency skills for both Native and non-Native health students in the current workforce? There's been some amazing gatherings that I've been honored to be a part of. I'm just always so inspired to hear the unique perspectives of some of our Native physicians and leaders and cultural perspectives. We've had a variety of meetings and retreats to look at the space design. I was just over in Spokane earlier this week, and Dr. Will James, who's sitting, who's to my left in this photo, is hard at work, working on some clinical sim scenarios. So we're continuing building this out. And how do we decolonize? How do we indigenize? And we're listening to those who have gone before, who have made this possible for us. And it's many voices. We're a symphony of voices that are helping to lead the way. And it's about reclaiming our traditional ways of knowing and healing, and really making the best in class healthcare. Many of us have seen a challenge doing that as we've evolved with healthcare and in the health systems we've worked in. And so it's, to me, I see it as a renaissance. It's a paradigm shift that's happening, and it's very exciting. Our goal is to bring healing and holism into a space that's been westernized. And how do we work with our people through story and voice, and how do we shift the paradigm so that it's focused on the patient and their culture and their practices, and we have curiosity at the heart of our healthcare system. We're looking at indigenous standardized patients, and really having it personalized for faculty, and also by place too, as we look at our different cultures that we serve. And starting, of course, Washington State University, we serve the 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington State as a focus, but we know that there are many tribal nations that live in the state of Washington, including the tribal nation that I come from, and we have over 1,000 tribal members that live in Washington. So in the end, our healthcare system serves many Indigenous people from all over the country here in Washington State. The sim space is going to be expanded, and really looking at simulating real-time hospital rooms, incorporating meditation and other modalities within. So there's a little art, Dr. Alvord, in the background. To where we incorporate these modalities, so that in the end, what can we do to promote a healing space, not only for the people we serve, but also for providers? I think working in a space like this is also comforting to those who are working in it. And we, as we heal others and work in a healing space, we are also a part of that scenario, right? Healing is reciprocal, ideally, right? And we've had such amazing input from a variety of voices, folks who are frontline workers who have the knowledge and expertise. I have been informing this effort. And like Dr. Terry Maresca, who's pictured here in the lower right. There's some amazing Indigenous healers and voices and stakeholders that have helped, Dr. Mary Owen, others that have really been amazing in bringing perspectives as we develop the Center for Native American Health Sciences in our efforts. So as I close my portion, and we'll be moving into some dialogue and final thoughts, I wanted to share a quote from the late Dr. Rita Pitka Blumenstein, a Yupik tribal doctor that I've had the honor of working with, learning from, and being inspired by. And she shares, "We are free to be who we are, to create our own life out of our past and out of the present. We are our ancestors. When we heal ourselves, we also heal our ancestors, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and our children. When we heal ourselves, we heal Mother Earth. And very profound wisdom. And as I unpack this all the time, there's epigenetic influences, there's spirituality, reclaiming our connection with Earth. And as we heal each other, we heal the Earth. And so, this interdependency, as Dr. Alvord shared, that is a part of Navajo belief systems. As we look at our indigenous knowledge, we know we're connected. And as we heal ourselves, we heal the planet. And individually, as healthcare providers, it's important for us to understand our healing is a part of that journey as well. So I will close as far as thoughts, and I want to bump it over to Dr. Alvord if she has any final thoughts before we go into question and answer.
Right. So I think, one of the things that was very lovely, Gary. Thank you so much, and such a nice overview of our work. I think that just coming back to, I'd love to sort of just point out a couple of very concrete type of practical things that we will be working to do that would be very appreciated by this group. For example, like in caring for Navajo patients, Danae, there's a real problem with advance directives and consent, because our beliefs are that you're not supposed to speak about the future in a negative way about yourself or others. So you could bring that into being, that could actually make it more likely to happen. So how do you talk to somebody about the possibility that they could have a complication after an operation, or that death, they have to sign things for a living will, and what would happen if they died, and things like that? Those are extremely difficult ways to manage or work with patients when you don't even understand that that's an issue for this tribe, and you could just stroll into a room and start talking about it, and people would just be like horrified. So that's one very obvious example. For a long time, there was a resistance to surgery because you're not supposed to cut the body, that cutting the body disrupted the harmony of the body, and so that's only been recent, accepted probably in the last 100 or so years or less. But there are still very traditional people who might have a great reluctance to have things done like that. There are beliefs, for example, that back when tuberculosis was big, in the earlier part of the last century, people would get it, but they wouldn't come into the hospital to be taken care of because they didn't trust Western medicine until they were too ill to be saved, and then they died. So people believed that hospitals were the place that you went to die. And so there's still been a fear of going to hospitals, because you can imagine if people with cancer don't go until it's late and then they don't live, then that's you think that's where you go to die. So who wants to go there, right? So there's various beliefs that have to be understood so that care can be facilitated, is what I would say. And we're doing that with tribes everywhere, all different belief systems, and building connection and respect between the patients and providers. And sometimes the patients are the providers, as in some of our traditional healers. They're providing care too. So it's not a one-way street, it's a two-way. So I'll stop with that.
Dr. Alvord, do you have time for a quick question?
Of course.
Okay, so we have a question. It says, as a surgeon, how do you go about consent and risks of procedures?
Sure. Well, yeah. So if you're working with a traditional person and you really want to know where they are in their lives, I mean, it's not going to be the same if I'm talking to a young progressive Navajo who, I don't know, he's just finished. I know some physicists that work in Sandia labs. I'm not going to get too worried about whether or not they're going to consent, because obviously they've been dealing with the molecules of the universe and they aren't too worried about disrupting them. But anyway, if they're very traditional and there's this advanced directive problem or consent form, what I try to do is to take it away from them and to say, in people who have this procedure, these sorts of things could happen. It's our job. We have to tell you that these things could happen. And then to say, when we ask for your consent, we need you to be aware that these sorts of things can happen. But it's not to say that they'll happen to you. It's just one of the ways that we try to give you all the information that we can. And so I try to defocus it as being directly on them, if that makes sense. And that's usually helpful. Sometimes you have to kind of do a risk benefit thing too. And you can sometimes say, like, there's a chapter for a young girl with appendicitis where a 4-year-old and a grandmother did not want to have surgery done, and she's at risk of rupture. And you have to be very clear about the idea that, if we weren't to do surgery, that the risks were higher, that something bad could happen to a child like her who had appendicitis, so that they understand what you're saying, but you're not saying that could happen. You're not saying it about them and that could happen to them.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions? Is it the question portion of the presentation?
Yes.
Any other questions, anybody?
I have a question. My name is Gabriela Morales. I'm actually a communication professor at NMSU, but I study culture and health communication. And one of the things that I'm constantly being faced with when I'm, teaching students that are in pre-med, pre-pharm, is this idea that Western medicine is it, that everything else is, as one of my students mentioned, a trend or something that's, something that's coming in and, it's there for a little while and then it goes away, but it's not. I mean, there's so many things that we don't recognize that can be very, very beneficial to people. And I guess my question to you, both of you, would be, when you have patients or even colleagues who can be resistant to things like this, how then do you formulate that communication to really make them aware, but also go beyond the awareness, go beyond the cultural competence and, accepting that awareness is it? I mean, we have to go beyond that and understand truly what this is bringing to the table. How do you formulate that communication with them? How do you present this to them as, we need to bring these practices in because they're just as important to helping people's well-being?
So I'll jump in just for a few words, and then of course Dr. Alvord. I always like to bring it back to our current medicine, Western medicine, where it comes from. A lot of our current Western pharmaceuticals are thanks to indigenous peoples, not only in the Americas, but around the world, right? A lot of our medicines have analogs that are, plant-based, that come from a traditional culture. And I think there's been some criticism, we've taken that medicine out of the culture, but we've forgotten the ceremony, the respect for that medicine in where it came from. Case in point, tamoxifen, which is used in cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer. Very few people realize that it's an indigenous medicine in its original analog, coming from the yew tree, Taxol, and then it became tamoxifen. And so you go on to the NCI website, and I've given pushback at the NIH Tribal Advisory Committee. I'm like, we need to push back against how NIH is not properly crediting where these medicines are coming from. And to me, as a naturopathic physician, where my scope of practice uses a lot of botanical medicine and integrative approaches that Dr. Alvord was talking about, I mean, I feel like there's a deep respect and a reverence. But even then, a lot of our current herbal medicine and studies don't fully credit the indigenous peoples that those medicines come from. And I think that's been why many indigenous nations are very reticent to share much more of their medicines and healing traditions, because there's fear that they'll be used in an inappropriate way or disrespectful of that way. But we're in a new chapter, and I think we're realizing now, intellectual property, ceremonies, these healing traditions are thousands of years old. Our current Western medical system is a couple of hundred years old. So, and of course, amazing. I mean, some of my early studies were in emergency medicine, and, we have amazing modalities to help people stay alive. But to keep them healthy and well, Western medicine isn't the best medicine. Our indigenous ways of knowing and healing, these integrative ideas, are much better at health and healing. And why don't we incorporate them into our current healthcare paradigm setting and have a deep respect on par with our Western reductionistic strategies that are also very powerful, but I think we need to be given credit where credit is due as to a lot of the wisdom that we currently practice has roots in our native communities. And to me, it's such a beautiful journey of learning and discovering these healing modalities and their power, because I think Western medicine has a lot to offer our clients, not only indigenous patients, but all patients, as we recognize these healing traditions and incorporate them. Dr. Alvord?
Yes, I would definitely agree with you. And I think that it's a lot better than it was 15 or 20 years ago, where there was so much derision about anything that had to do with integrative or alternative medicine. NIH now has their own division for integrative medicine, and they fund studies on it. And so you see a lot of people using naturopaths, using chiropractors, using acupuncturists, and then using indigenous medicine too. And so I think that the acceptability has gone up. The studies that show that their effectiveness in some of our work with many different things is very helpful. And to show, to people who are still resistant, I think, yeah, that's they're dinosaurs, but hopefully we'll keep progressing and moving forward, and just like this talk today, infusing young minds with ways of thinking differently, and for me, in fact, although the herbs are very, very important, and like things like curare and digoxin and vitamin C even were, used by native people, for scurvy and for heart and for, types of anesthesia, millennia before, Western medicine got around to understanding or using them. But my own feeling is that that we will things will get better, but it's part of Western culture, the Western culture of medicine. It's just like people don't want to call that a culture, but it is a culture. And part of its culture is to put down anything else that isn't it, and guess what? It was created by white males. So are we at all surprised? I mean, because that's the way they are anyway, for vast amount of them, very patronizing. And so until that breaks open, and I think that's breaking open because we have more people, we have more women in medicine, we have more people of color, we have much more diversity. So the voices are not just coming from one group, a small group of people that are running the show. And so, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody, but if you look at the history of medicine, that's how it happened, and even now I'm dealing with some people with residency problems where, residents are struggling against some of these old practices and ways of teaching that are really causing harm to their minds and their bodies. And it's very sad.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, it looks like we are out of time. I just want to say how much I appreciate both of you for coming and talking with us. This has been a really, really great presentation, and we'll make sure that your recording is distributed to all of the residencies if you weren't able to come.
Sure. Can we get a copy too? That would be lovely for our center. I think we'd really appreciate that, right, Gary? Yes. This is the first time Gary and I have co-presented. So we were supposed to present with Naomi and Will and Hood River, but Gary got sick, and so I didn't get a chance to be with him. It's my first
No.
time being with you, so yeah.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Kagasakuk. It's been a nice and wonderful conversation, which I hope will help be inspirational for change.
Yes.
And our next generation of providers, I mean, I'm very excited by the future. There's a lot of great things happening.
Best of luck to New Mexico, to your primary care physicians. Blessings to all of you. I should also share that my son has just started his first year of family medicine training in Hawaii at the Hilo program. So he's there because his partner is from Hilo, not because he loves the wonderful weather and water, but they're very interested in giving back too. So best of luck to you.